Good evening. My name is Mary Atherley, co-president of the Ames Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to the last lecture in our 9th annual lecture series. And you're probably wondering where Kathy Speck is, right? Well, she fell off the deck today and broke her foot, so she's hopefully home with her foot up on an ottoman or something, but she's doing fine. Anyway, she didn't think she could get up the stairs tonight, so that's why I'm up here. I know you'll really enjoy tonight's program, which blends local history of Iowa State University and early Ames. And there are hundreds of fascinating stories of Ames, and Doug Biggs and his wife, Gloria Beardshear, wrote about many of these in their new book, which is available for purchase at our gift shop in the lobby. And by the way, I think you should know that they have generously donated all the profits from the sale of this book to the Ames Historical Society. So keep that in mind. We'll keep the shop open after the talk and question period tonight, so you get a chance to relook at the things that are out there. And there will be a door prize. All of you, I hope you put your name in that little jar out there, and the door prize is the book that they wrote. We sincerely thank those in the audience who are already members of the Ames Historical Society, because your support means everything to us. Whoa, have you not been hearing me? Is that better? Okay. Membership in Ames Historical Society provides resources to ensure the preservation of our collective past, and if you're not a member, we hope you'll consider joining us tonight or soon. This year, 2014, we are celebrating the sesquicentennial, or the 150th anniversary of the platting and founding of Ames. Committees are hard at work on a number of special events and programs. So as the year goes on, be sure to watch for dates and schedules. We hope especially that you'll attend sesquicentennial events over the 3-day July 4th weekend, but there are more to come. And there is a website. It's ames150.com, so you can also look there for information. Okay, this is the test. What's the website? I didn't hear it. Good, okay, ames150.com. Just remember, and it's little case letters. Tonight's speaker is Doug Biggs, who was born in Ames, where his father, Don, taught at Iowa State University for his entire career. Many of you, like me, probably remember his charming mother, Chamberlain, and his irascible father, Don. Doug comes from good stock. Dr. Biggs holds a BA and an MA in history from Iowa State University and a PhD from the University of Minnesota. He is currently a professor of history and associate dean at University of Nebraska-Kearney with a specialty in medieval history. Doug regularly presents research at international conferences on both sides of the Atlantic and is the managing series editor for a monograph series on late medieval Europe. While his historical expertise lies with the political culture of late medieval England, he applies his research skills adeptly to local topics. In the late 2009, Dr. Biggs became interested in the history of his hometown and also his undergraduate alma mater. He and his wife Gloria have done a number of joint projects that involve topics of interest to both Iowa State and the town of Ames. This interest has led to several publications, a book, and public lectures on historical subjects in Ames, one of which we will be hearing tonight. And now, Douglas Biggs. Doug.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you to all of you for coming on a very beautiful evening. This talk grew out of a lot of work that I had done, as Mary said, beginning in 2009. And it's been a lot of fun to look into the history of not only my hometown, but also my home university. And I found a whole bunch of, I think, fun and I hope significant pieces that help to explain the transformation of both entities. And to me, as a professional historian, and you're going to hear a bunch of my interpretation this evening, this period, 1890 to 1900, maybe 1910, but I'm only going to make it a decade for tonight's purposes, is one of the most significant in the history of both communities. In the 150 years since Ames's founding, the decade of the 1890s stands out as one of the most significant in the history of the town. During these years, Ames underwent a metamorphosis from a tiny town without water, sewage, or electricity to a town with all these things and more. In spite of the 5 years of economic depression ushered in by the Panic of 1893, Ames in this decade bucked the national trend of depression to find its business district full of businesses long before the McKinley prosperity arrived at the national level in 1897. Hand in hand with economic growth went a population boom in Ames. And over the 1890s, the city's population grew from 1,276 in 1890 to 2,422 in 1900, according to the census, a growth rate of 89.8%, the largest to this point in its history. Many factors influenced this transformation of Ames. First, on the national level, the culture of the country itself promoted progress. Contemporaries labeled this period, as the Progressive Age, a time in American history marked by an almost universal desire for economic, scientific, technological, and material growth to enhance the lives of all Americans. Yet, even with this desire for progress and growth, the national economy experienced a succession of swings in the 1890s, which became the second national factor influencing the transformation of the city and the college. The Panic of 1893 ushered in the greatest economic downturn in the nation's history before the Great Depression, but the nation's economy rebounded by the end of the decade. And what contemporaries called the McKinley prosperity, named after William McKinley when he got elected president in 1896, combined with the golden age of American agriculture, put more dollars in the pockets of Iowans and helped to fuel the great boom in Iowa State College's enrollment at the end of the decade. However important these national factors may or may not have been to society at large, broad socioeconomic forces explain only part of our community's metamorphosis. History, I argue, is ultimately about people and the organizations they create. Of all the forces that influenced Ames in these years, one group of individuals and one organization stand out as the most significant elements in the transformation of the college and the city. The individuals were Wallace Greeley on the far right, Parley Sheldon in the middle, and of course William Beardshear on the far left, who became the president of Iowa State College in 1891. Through these three vibrant personalities, vision, and tireless efforts, the city and college achieved great things. And Beardshear's desire to have a close relationship between the city and the college created a synergy that brought unparalleled success to both. But without the transformative influence of this thing, the Ames College Railway, the college might never have broken out of its less than splendid isolation on the prairie west of Ames, and the city may never have grown much beyond being a water and coal stop for John Inslee Blair's Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. The little steam tram, through its lifetime, was the only reliable mass transit system between Ames and the campus 2 miles to its east. The dinky, as we still call the ANC, wears a heavy veil of myth and legend that has often obscured the actual work that the motor line did and its significance to both the college and city communities. The Ames College Railway, over the 16 years of its existence from 1891 to 1907, carried more than 2.1 million passengers between Ames, with an average population of 1,850, and Iowa State, with an average population of 1,125, and ferried to campus nearly all of the materials used to build the new structures that were being added to the college in these years. But before diving into the 1890s, it is important, I think, to place that decade within the context of the decade that went before it, because the 1880s were difficult years in the city and the college. Some of IAC, Iowa Agricultural College, as Iowa State was then known, some of its difficulties lay in the isolation that its founders sought for it. College education in 19th century America usually followed the old British model, in which faculty members taught not only courses, but also character and religious instruction as well. To effectively accomplish this educational goal, most colleges and universities were founded well away from what were seen as the corrupting influence of urban centers, in bucolic settings where students could concentrate on their studies and where nature was an education in itself. Our agricultural college was no exception. And as you can see from these two photos from 1888, the views from the top of the main, this one's looking out to the, what's the word I want, north and to the east, and that's North Hall out there. Once you get past the college buildings, there's not a whole lot there. And this one is looking to the south and to the west. And once you get past the college buildings, there's one farmhouse and then nothing. So literally, if you went to college at Iowa State in those years, it was pretty isolated. Throughout the first 20 years of its existence, the nearest town, us, Ames, lay 2 miles away down an undrained dirt track, then known as Boone Street. Today we call it Lincoln Lane. The road washed out during Squaw Creek flooding, which, as we know, is hardly unusual, and it was rendered impassable for weeks on end in the winter by heavy snows. By 1874, the college had begun to contract with a horse-drawn wagon, known as the college bus, to provide transport to and from town. But the 2-mile slog of a journey could take hours, and it cost 10 cents one way. Excuse me. Even as late as 1887, Maria Roberts, from the class of 1890, remembered that extra teams of horses were needed to pull the bus out of the swampy floodplain. Throughout the 1880s, the faculty at Iowa State called for the Board of Trustees to find a regular and rapid transportation service, but with budgets being tight, nothing ever came of their requests. Most students, faculty, and staff, both men and women, spent their college years with no easy way to escape the college grounds, living literally on top of each other in the main. The splendid isolation that was supposed to help educate the students in practical reality tended to create a familiarity between the groups that not all parents, Board of Regents members, or even state legislators thought appropriate. In fact, far from building character, IAC's isolation helped to fuel intense frustrations within the faculty and the student body that created across the 1880s an increasingly unstable environment. Students were only permitted to leave campus with permission of the president, except on Saturday afternoons. And definite patterns of behavior among the young gentlemen and the young ladies were rigorously enforced. This instability permeated nearly every level of the institution, and the presidency itself changed hands no fewer than 4 times in the 7 years between 1883 and 1890. Adoniah Welch, followed by Seaman Knapp, Lee Hunt, and then 4 years of William Chamberlain. Among the faculty at Iowa State, curriculum was the most divisive issue. President Welch had entered office in 1869, pledged to what he called a broad curriculum that included things like engineering, liberal arts, teacher training, and the ladies' course that we might call home economics. But a significant number of faculty, backed by powerful agricultural interests in the state, wanted the institution to teach only agriculture. It was an agricultural college after all. Unfortunately, many of the students, the majority of the students in fact, at IAC did not enroll to take agricultural degrees. And the pro-agricultural faculty members discovered, much to their chagrin, that they could not simply jettison the broad curriculum, send it off to Iowa City, without destroying the institution, and thus their careers. Nevertheless, old wounds and frustrations over curricular issues lingered for decades. Students chafed under the draconian enforcement of rules relating to student behavior and became increasingly frustrated with the existence of secret societies, or the Greek system, on campus in the mid and late 1880s. Their frustrations found expression through a series of student rebellions, some of them violent, in 1885, 1887, 1888, and 1890. By the time Iowa State graduated the class of 1890 in November of that year, relations between the president and the students were so strained that the entire graduating class boycotted the baccalaureate ceremony right before commencement. And you can imagine what commencement is like, because many of you have had children and grandchildren that graduated. Everybody's sitting in the audience waiting for something wonderful to happen, and everybody's there, including the governor, who's the featured speaker, but the graduates. Following this debacle, the trustees asked for and received the resignation of President William Chamberlain, him. And within certain corners of the agricultural community, concerns were openly expressed as to whether the entire idea of an agricultural college was even worth continuing. Just shut the place down, send the chair of agriculture over to Iowa City, and just head on. The 1880s were just as difficult a time in the city. William Morrison Payne, innovative attorney who wrote a history of the county in 1911, noted that Ames did little to support its citizenry or grow its population until Parley Sheldon's first 2-year stint as mayor in 1884, when the city council voted $100 to build what was called at the time, and for many years was called, City Park. We know it as Bandshell Park. The city council minutes bear out Payne's interpretation, and they often note, and they're just over there in the mayor's office if you'd like to read them someday, they're a lot of fun. And I quote, "Much talking up was done on various matters on which no action was taken." And I bet we could probably say the exact same thing about what's going on tonight. I shouldn't say that because my wife's a city council person, but that's okay. Following his 1884 success, Sheldon moved on to secure funds to build the first town hall for a rather substantial sum at the time, $2,000, that was finished and opened for business, if you will, in 1886. While these were notable successes, the city still had no electricity, no waterworks, and no fire department. Thus, fire was a constant threat to homes and businesses. 3 major conflagrations destroyed most of the business district on Onondaga Street, what used to be called Main Street, including the Opera House in 1886 and 1887. Anna Graves, an eyewitness to these events, noted that without a fire department, and I quote, "there was nothing to do but watch it burn," unquote. The Ames Intelligencer, the oldest newspaper in town, reported the loss over these 3 fires at $36,000, less than half of which could be covered by insurance. In spite of these setbacks, the overwhelming confidence of the progressive age, I argue, is evidenced by the resilience of both communities across the 1890s. When Parley Sheldon became mayor for a second time in 1890, he was determined to rebuild and expand his community. And he had a lot of work in front of him. As the new decade dawned, on January 1, 1890, Ames was a place with no opera house, no sewage system, no fire department, no waterworks, no street lamps, no electricity, no public library, no hospital, and no reliable public transportation. Ames did have 2 banks, Sheldon's own, Story County, and his friend Wallace Greeley, sometimes rival, Wallace Greeley's Union National Bank. But their combined valuation by the state in 1890 was just under $35,000, or $1,000 less than the combined loss of the fires of 1886 and 1887. Nevertheless, Sheldon dug in and helped Ames secure its first waterworks in 1890 and 1891. It was just confined to right downtown. It was a huge improvement on what had been before. He also organized the first volunteer fire department in 1891 and helped to facilitate the Bud Stevens Opera House on the corner of Onondaga and Kellogg that opened late in 1891. And here it is in the newspaper, the drawing on the left, and there it is yesterday. I took the picture. It's still there. It's not as big, and it's been, cut up and changed over time, but these buildings, many of them, still exist. They've been actively reused, but they still exist. They're still with us. Sheldon's second stint as mayor coincided almost exactly with IAC's Board of Trustees choosing a new president. The man the trustees chose in January of 1891 was that guy, William Beardshear, superintendent of the Des Moines Public Schools at that point in time. Beardshear was born in Ohio in 1850, had studied for the Methodist ministry, and had attended Yale Divinity School before a bout of physical exhaustion forced him to leave his studies. In 1881, the 31-year-old Beardshear became one of the youngest college presidents in the country when he accepted the presidency of Western College in Toledo, which is now one of the reform schools that's owned by the state. During his 8 years as president of Western, Beardshear had built firm ties between the college and the city of Toledo, creating a synergy between both of these two entities that meant undeniable success, both economic and educational for both. This was a powerful experience, which demonstrated Beardshear's unquestioned ability, and it was one that he would recreate in his efforts to establish what the Ames Intelligencer said in July of 1891, a close relationship between Ames and IAC. And as we'll see down the road, it's very, very powerful and impressive, at least I argue. At the time when IAC needed inspired leadership, it found it in the person of William Beardshear. He saw far and deep and possessed the ability to judge the character of others with which only great men are gifted. His friend Lewis Pamela described him as, and I quote, one of the most tolerant men he'd ever met, unquote. Beardshear's remarkable tolerance would be tested time and again by students, colleagues, and the legislature over the last decade of his life. One of Beardshear's most obvious contributions to the college was as a campus planner. Much of what we now call Central Campus is a product of his vision. He understood that, and I quote, he wrote this himself, buildings and improvements talk without words. And he worked hard to place major building projects where they would have the most effect on those who viewed them. It was Beardshear who determined the location for Agricultural Hall, now Cat Hall, Margaret Hall, now long gone, Campanile, the Marston Water Tower, and Engineering or Marston Hall. All of these buildings. Campanile, Water Tower, Marston. These are all the big ones. There are a bunch of little ones that went with it. The construction of many of these buildings along with the remodeling of existing ones, was undertaken, it's important to remember, in the middle of the Long Depression, following the Panic of 1893, when state monies were especially hard to come by. When it came to dealing with personnel, Beardshear was deliberate and single-minded. He surrounded himself with like-minded people. His faculty was made up of men and women who held the advancement of the institution and the success of their students as the highest goal. Any and all who strayed from these principles were shown the door and replaced by those who shared Beardshear's vision. Thus, the president found it easy to make common cause with his faculty, and in concert with them, he transformed the curriculum of the college to fit the needs of a modern and progressive state and nation. Though the divisive frustrations and hatreds of the 1880s did not pass easily, the president worked hard to build his vision of, and I quote, which he used often, the People's College, unquote, which offered a broad-based curriculum that included not only agriculture, but also engineering, science, the liberal arts, and the emerging social sciences, like psychology, that he himself taught as well. Between 1891 and 1902, Beardshear increased the size of his campus, and he also increased the size of his faculty from 34 to 84. While the numbers and percentages tell one story, who these men and women were is, I think, more significant. Professors like Anson Marston, who we'll see more of in a bit, in civil engineering, Louis Spinney, in electrical engineering, J.D. Weems in chemistry, Perry Holden in agronomy, and Maria Roberts, graduate of the class of 1892 in math, were all hired by Beardshear, and they possessed national and or international reputations in their disciplines. These professors were the equals to any, let me say that again, these professors were the equal of those in any university in the country, and the ultimate beneficiaries of this renowned faculty presence were the students, as Beardshear intended. While he treated his faculty as colleagues, he treated his students as adults. An extraordinary attitude, I think you must agree, when the age of majority was 21 and not 18. Thus, most of Iowa State students were not legally adults until they were juniors or seniors. Some Iowans vehemently disagreed with the president's attitude. Mr. Hillman of Brand Junction, a visitor to IAC in 1898, encountered the president walking across campus one day and said to him, "Sir," and I quote, "I've been all over this institution. It is a great college. One thing, however, I should like to suggest is that you keep your students in their rooms and not leave them to run about," unquote. To which the president replied, and I quote, "Sir, this is not a reform school. The reform school is in Eldora. Our students are on their honor," unquote. Beardshear believed that physical activity needed to be a part of the regular curriculum, and worked diligently to make athletics a part of college life at IAC. In 1892, the college first participated in organized intercollegiate athletics, and Beardshear, seeking to realize his high ambitions, asked Glenn "Pop" Warner, the most well-respected football man in the country, to coach his college team. Warner could only coach the Cyclones for 7 weeks, or several weeks a year because of other coaching commitments at other institutions, but IAC still did well, as their coach taught them, amassing an 18-8 record from 1895 to 1899 with Warner at the helm. Beardshear's hard work on campus was mirrored by his tireless efforts in advancing the cause of his college across the state and nation. To this end, he crisscrossed Iowa, giving more than 100 lectures per year, extolling what he called the virtues of the People's College. Yet Beardshear understood that he could not reach every citizen in Iowa with his lectures, and so he invited the citizens of Iowa rather to come to his college. He negotiated fares, reduced fares, but the railroads, so that on specific days, Iowans could and did come and visit Iowa State. In 1898, he organized the first of many excursion days, gala events, and show days for the college that attracted thousands of Iowans to IAC. On these days, laboratories, classrooms, the farm, everything, all of the work of the institution was laid out before the people of the state. They could go to any class, visit any lab, look at anything going on in the farm, and visit any dorm. All they had to do was show up. They could see it for themselves, where their tax money was going. It was not only powerful, it lasted in the minds of these people for generations. All these outreach efforts raised IAC's profile. They could not do all that was needed to promote the college, and Beardshear accepted important positions in state agricultural organizations to increase the awareness of IAC across the state. He also took an active role in the Iowa State Teachers Association, serving as its president in 1894. And by 1901, he had become the president of the National Education Association, the first person from an agricultural college ever to attain that position. Of all the people and projects that Beardshear leveraged to transform his college, and some people might argue the city was one of those, perhaps the most significant was the dinky, or as contemporaries called it, the motor line. This little train was the brainchild of two senior electrical engineering students, James Bramwell on the left, Charles Davidson on the right, who, throughout their senior year of 1890, worked on a joint thesis that proposed the construction of an electric railroad, or motor line, between Ames and IAC. Both students were conscious that an electric rail link between IAC and Ames would open the campus to all manner of vices of town life, and the outside world would inexorably creep in to Iowa State's hitherto splendid isolation, or less than splendid isolation. Thus, the two conceived that their railroad would only run on a part-time basis, maybe only 230 days a year, and perhaps carry as many as 1,200 passengers at the beginning and the end of every term, or significantly fewer in their prospectus than 10,000 passengers a year. The two designers were aided, perhaps oddly, in their efforts by an IAC alumnus, District Court Judge John Loomis Stevens, and a group of investors that he gathered around him, who were also graduates of IAC. Stevens was a member of the first graduating class of Iowa State in 1872 and was a self-styled progressive. He was intimately involved in bringing material improvements to Ames, such as a telephone in 1877, and maintained a lifelong connection with his college. Yet Judge Stevens soon discovered that Bramwell and Davidson had woefully underestimated the costs necessary to build an electric railroad. And Stevens and his original group of investors did not possess the capital to fund an enterprise in almost any case. Even though the judge widened the scope of his investors to include a number of prominent city capitalists and college faculty, the best his expanded group could afford to build was a steam-powered railway with a poorly prepared roadbed and used equipment. With a determination worthy of Hercules, Stevens pressed forward with his vision. On the 16th of April, 1891, Robert Hopkins, one of Stevens' principal investors, reached an agreement with the Des Moines Suburban Railway Company to purchase one used steam dummy engine and two used street rail passenger cars for the princely sum of $3,800. That. Construction on the road began in April, and on July 4, 1891, the motor line opened for regular business. In a moment, Ames, its station, and the world that had been hours away on an undrained dirt track We're now only 8 minutes in the distance at the cost of 5 cents a ride. In spite, come on, there's a ticket from 1891. In spite of derailments, breakdowns, and continual maintenance issues, and oh, there were a lot of them, the dinky operated on a regular schedule for the last 6 months of 1891 and hauled nearly 40,000 passengers. By the end of the first fiscal year of operations, the A&C had carried nearly 77,000 people down that 2-mile band rail between Ames and the college. Nearly 8 times what the investors had predicted at its inception. The motor line also figured prominently in Beardshear's plans because there was more to the A&C than merely a train. It was going to be the vehicle that would deliver tens of thousands of passengers to his campus each year. He knew that for many of these men and women, their first introduction to campus would be the one they saw from the dinky's windows. And he intended for that view to leave a lasting impression. As the motor steamed up the grade from the Squaw Valley, the passengers rode through the heart of the model farm, where the latest agricultural advancements were laid out before them. Then, the passengers retreated to a striking view of the park we now call Central Campus. And finally, the 5-story main, resplendent in her coat of white paint, contrasted with the rich red brick of Morrill Hall, both of which seemed to rise up right out of the prairie. The little train finished its journey in between these 2 buildings. So the passengers alighting from the cars were dwarfed by the campus's 2 most impressive structures. It sounds impossible to us in our time because we're so used to huge skyscrapers and everything else. But so many of those people who came to campus in the 1890s were from small towns and farms. They'd never seen buildings this grand, let alone as students known they were going to live in one of them. So meaningful was the motor line to the life of the community that the little train produced an overt sentimentality in the minds of townspeople and students. The Ames newspapers made the A&C's employees into local celebrities and enthusiastically chronicled events great and small on the motor line. But by far the most significant of the Ames College Railway's superstars or celebrities was this guy, Hank Wilkinson, who began work for the A&C in 1892 as a conductor. He was a tall and robust man who made friends easily and earned him the respect and admiration of students and faculty alike. Both Ames and IAC newspapers eagerly covered his doings, which soon became the stuff of legend. Hank cut quite a dash on the motor line, and the IAC student, the campus newspaper of the day, could not help but be impressed. In 1894, the paper noted that young men escorting their ladies to chapel all wished to display, and I quote, a cool self-confidence similar to that of Hank boarding the motor, unquote. One of Hank's most notable exploits occurred in the autumn of 1893, when the Ames Times reported on the race between the dinky and a cow. It seems that a lone cow had somehow escaped from its pasture on the IAC farm and wandered near the motor track, on which the dinky was steaming back to town. The lone bovine turned and began to run alongside the engine when it passed. As the paper told the tale, the race between the cow and the steam engine was a lengthy and close run affair, but, and I quote, Hank finally won the heat. Not surprisingly, after the race, the cow ended up by Squaw Creek, where the students found her, apparently no worse for the wear, the next morning. The dinky enabled increasing numbers of students to move off campus and to live in boarding houses, and the faculty members to live in what they all called, increasingly, East Ames, what we call downtown. This mobility eased, but did not solve, what was rapidly becoming an overcrowding problem on campus. More importantly, the new railway brought the city and college together as one community. Just as the motor line took students and townspeople to Ames and beyond, it brought the outside world to the college. The college soon began to host regional and statewide conferences of agriculturalists and husbandmen, and even attracted entertainers of national prominence. One of these it's a funny story, was John C. Lewis, who brought his vaudeville troupe to Ames on a rather cold December 16th in 1892 to perform his very popular play, Cy Plunkard. Lewis was a nationally known director and actor who spent over 20 years touring the country with this play, Cy Plunkard. There is no doubt that Lewis's comedy and drama were written for and played to Midwestern sensibilities, but the fact that both he and his work spread so far across time and space strongly suggests the material in the production struck a chord with his audiences in the 2 decades that spanned the turn of the 19th century. His Ames audience that snowy December in 1892 was no exception. And to ensure that the college audience would be able to enjoy the 2.5 hours of entertainment, the Ames College Railway laid on a special motor that departed for campus at 10:40 p.m., all nice and warm and toasty. No one, it seemed, wanted to miss it. The fact that Beardshear allowed students to come and go freely from campus meant an almost constant flow of students from campus to Ames to live, shop, and play. And they brought a boom time to our community throughout the 1890s. Several billiard halls, I know you'll be shocked to know this, were frequent student hangouts. Dances were frequently held in the new, at this point, Bud Stevens Opera House, since dancing, of course, was strictly forbidden on campus. But by far the most popular student hangout was the lunch counter at the old Chicago and Northwestern Depot, because the food here was 10 times better than anything on campus. I know, it's a surprise. New businesses opened their doors that would become the staples of our community for decades. And one of my favorites, and I was able to take a picture of this yesterday, was the Transformative. It opened for business for the first time in 1893. And established businesses like Tilden's department store, as you can tell, did not want a customer. Even though it's Christmas week, it's just packed, and it was that way all the time. The existence of the ANC also enabled the city to annex the land around the college and bring it into the city limits in January of 1893. This action on the part of the city had far-reaching consequences, which we still live with today. And Mary Appially spent many years on city council, and you know very well. Dealing with the university and the city is an important component in our life in this community. This is where it comes from, annexation in 1893. Annexation brought about the synergy between the city and the college that Beardshear wished to see. And now, an educated and affluent community of faculty and students came into the ranks of Ames citizenry. Townspeople rode the dinky to listen to public lectures on campus, go to sporting events, and even to sing in the college choral society. Progressive Ames citizens, like Rowena Edson Stevens, the wife of John Loomis Stevens, founder of the Dinky, worked to further the cause of women's suffrage in Ames, in addition to helping create a fledgling public library that moved between upstairs rooms in various businesses in the 1890s. In 1893, Edgar Stanton became the first IAC faculty member elected to the Ames City Council in over a decade. For the next 25 years, there would not be a single city council seat that did not have at least one IAC employee on it. Ames' newest group of younger citizens, the students, also flexed their political muscle, such as in 1894, when a group of students came before the city council with a petition asking the city to close a slaughterhouse that was polluting the Squaw Creek. While the city moved swiftly to answer the student petitioners in July of 1894, there were occasions I don't know, I can pick on Mary because, you sat in city council for a long, long time. There were occasions when the wheels of city government ran more slowly than others. And one of them I want to talk about here. In February of 1894, the Ames Intelligencer reported it had received a flyer announcing a public meeting at City Hall to discuss the options for cleaning up an open sewer south of the Chicago and Northwestern Main Line. The paper wondered how people who lived near the ditch could stand the stench, and admonished the city council and the city for having unresolved sanitation issues. And it argued that fire protection and even electricity, and I quote, should stand back, unquote, until the sewer problem was fixed. The city council sent the issue to a committee in the spring, and even went so far as to hire Professor Anson Marston, noted civil engineer and Iowa State faculty member, to look into the issue in June. But without any funding, I don't know, you're surprised, nothing was done to fix the problem. Emotions and frustrations throughout the summer, and you could guess why, because it would smell even more then, tended to run rather high within the city council and without, over the matter of, and I quote the Intelligencer here, the malarial swamp, as it referred to the sewer, until one event seemed to change the entire political dynamic in revolving around this issue that took place on the evening of September 26th. As Mayor Henry Wilson walked down Main Street that evening, he met City Councilman Thomas Thompson, coming the other way, right smack dab in front of Wallace Greeley's Union Bank. Rather than exchange pleasantries, and I'm quoting the Intelligencer here, His Honor, the Mayor, insinuated that Thompson's lingual appendage was not noted for exact veracity in language more forcible than polite, unquote, and Councilman Thompson, and I quote, let a left-hander fall upon the mayor's less than dignified chin, unquote. Now, I'm not going to in any way promote physical violence in politics, but we can say that the effect of fisticuffs on city politics in this case seemed to have the desired effect, because the Intelligencer reported on October 18th, well, not quite 2.5 weeks later, that, and with no small amount of pride, that the open sewer south of town was being cleaned up, and I quote, as fast as 5 men and a foreman can do the work, unquote. The city not only found difficulty in bringing better sanitary conditions to its citizens in 1894, but public demands for electricity in these middle years of the decade became inexorable. Bringing electricity to Ames had been in the works since the Dinky discussions of 1890 and 1891. But by 1894, the core of the public debate turned on how we could possibly afford to build a power plant. Because the first half of the decade had shown that no matter how many local people would try, we just didn't have the money in town to build it on our own. Many in town feared what they called a foreign company, not from out of the country, but from out of Ames, coming in, building a power plant, and then taking all the profits out of the town and leaving us with nothing. And several solutions were tried, several contracts were let, etc., etc. But in February of 1896, the city council just finally stepped in and bit the bullet and put before the electorate a bond issue to levy 5% to raise enough taxation, $12,000, to build that. The first power plant in the city of Ames, which stood where the current does. Obviously, it's a lot smaller. There was a lot of wrangling, and some violent emotions were raised over the issue, at least if the newspapers can be believed, over the increase of local taxation. But when votes were counted, they ran 298 to 40 in favor of municipal power, which we still have to this very day. And on the 19th of November, 1896, the Ames Times, the second newspaper in town in this period, noted with pride, I know I'm cheating here because this is 1929, we don't have an 1896 picture, that the lights, and I quote, were turned on. Contemporaries clearly understood they were living in a boom time where the city had achieved a tremendous amount of progress. But there were occasions when students and townspeople rubbed up against each other and caused friction. And one incident that occurred in April 1895 played itself out in the newspaper. The Times reported in a lengthy piece that a group of college boys, presumably freshmen, quote unquote, had come down on the motor and acted in a most inappropriate manner downtown. The paper reported that the group came out from campus to the cafe, or the lunch counter at the CNMW depot, and caused a ruckus by eating everything in sight and annoying the patrons by repeated yelling of the college cheer and engaging in snatchless pieces of doggerel, which was entirely uncalled for and deserving of the severest censure. The IAC student noted in its next edition that the Times account was an attempt on the part of the college editor of the paper to be sensational, and that the paper had represented, and I quote the student, a pretty highly colored account, unquote, of what had actually transpired at the depot, and suggested that the Times concentrate their reporting on, quote, the good features of IAC, rather than fill up its columns with criticisms that are both offensive and unjust, unquote. The editors of the Times, of course adults as opposed to students, were not about to accept this version of events, and in very un-Times-like language in their next edition, took what the Times called a, quote, obscure public or college publication, unquote, to task for its temerity. The Times wrote that upon reading the story in The Student, anyone who was acquainted with the events at the depot would be led, and I quote, to believe that there were several large orifices in the skypiece of the worthy sage from whose facile pen it had emanated, and that he had better glue them up and talk through something else. Throughout the later 1890s, the nation's economy recovered, and IAC's enrollment grew from 425 in 1891 to nearly 1,000 by 1900, well beyond the institution's ability to feed and house them all. And as the new century dawned, William Beardshear had already accomplished much, but he still saw a bold and clear vision for the future. He wanted to change his college from a residential campus in the old British model to a more progressive school in the German model of universities where students lived off campus in town or in boarding houses around the college, where teaching and research, rather than where character and religious instruction, were key in interactions between faculty and students. Housing and feeding growing numbers of students in either East Ames or in the boarding houses that were springing up on the south side of campus in the last years of the century was a daunting project, and one where Ames played catch-up for many years. As IAC underwent, or ISC I should say, underwent increasingly rapid changes, so too did the city, increasingly finding that the measured pace of the quiet past was inadequate to the hectic present. New construction in the town and the college meant more jobs, more people. More people meant more demand for city services, increased tax rates, more city infrastructure, more city employees, and a busier town. As more and more people came to Ames to visit the town and its college, the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad realized the old depot at the east end of downtown was no longer suited to the task, and they built a new state-of-the-art depot, which opened in November 1900, that had not one, but 2 lunch counters for all the students to come down and take part in, which they did with great glee. Even the dinky itself reflected the hectic pace of life in these last years of the century. When the ANC had been founded in 1891, city ordinance demanded that the train never steam at more than 8 miles per hour along its entire route. But in 1898, difficulties in keeping to the timetable forced the little railroad to seek approval from the city council to run the train up to 25 miles an hour in the Squaw Creek bottoms, between the switch, just at the end of Main Street downtown, and the farm. Every entity in town, it seemed, reflected the increasing speed at which life moved. As the decade and century neared their end, the hectic pace of change could also be seen in Iowa State, and the institution underwent a name change from Iowa Agricultural College, which it had been since its founding, to Iowa State College in 1898. The name change was more than merely cosmetic. In a number of ways, it was a benchmark of how far Beardshear had brought the college from 1891. Not only did the Great Excursion Days begin in 1891, so too did the great growth in enrollment, as more and better students with different expectations from towns and cities, as well as from farms, came to campus. Perhaps most importantly of all, beginning in the autumn of 1898, the president began to push the argument with the trustees that the parents who sent their children to the People's College should expect and receive a level of education and support services that they might expect at the university in Iowa City. After all, many of the faculty at ISC were the equals, if not the betters, of those at Iowa then and now. So there was no appreciable difference between the two institutions in the quality of the degrees that they offered. This address to the trustees, presidential address to the trustees on this issue, was a significant moment. Never before in the 30-year history of the institution had anyone ever considered a degree from the Agricultural College to be the equivalent of a degree from the State University of Kansas City. For all the community's growth and the vision of its leaders, however, two calamities befell the community in the winter of 1900 that markedly changed how Iowa State and Ames would operate in the new century. First, the outbreak of typhoid fever on campus in October and November that claimed the lives of 5 students. And second, burning of the north wing of the main on December 8th, 1900, the principal male dormitory, and of course the original structure on campus. And that's what's left of it. And I know it sounds rather odd, but the Board of Trustees met right after the fire in December, and rather than tear the rest of the building down, they ordered the section here, the bird section taken down, all this stuff walled off. They repainted it, and they put students back in it. I'm not quite sure we could get away with doing that today, but that's what they did in 1901. In these difficult days, that synergy, that close relationship that William Beardshear had hoped to create seemed to be more in evidence than at any other time in the decade. First, with this. The Ames College Railway ran special trains free of charge to any and all who wished to attend the funeral services at the college for the students who died of typhoid. And then, when the main burned in the early morning hours of December 8th, it was the Dinky that made numerous trips to campus, bringing volunteer firefighters from Ames to the college and carrying student refugees all back free of charge. But the AMC's response to these crises was not all. And I think it's worthy of note how the citizens responded as well. A number of Ames citizens volunteered to nurse students stricken with typhoid in the makeshift hospital in October and November, without a lot of regard to their own safety. Because remember, there's no antibiotics, and typhoid could kill you. And a lot of Ames citizens came out and nursed those students. Second, and perhaps more important, Ames residents, after the burning of the main, opened their homes to students free of charge for the last 2 weeks before the Christmas break, and then offered their homes again to students in the spring term at a reduced rent for both room and board. These calamities allowed the president to make the case to the trustees and the legislature for a new central building to replace what was left of the main. Not only was Beardshear's plan to build a massive building, but when the thing was done, this is a fun little fact, in 1906, when all the, nuts and bolts and screws and everything else were counted, and all the bricks and everything was put in place, the final cost was a staggering $415,000. And I've checked this with the state architect, and I've checked this with the Student Historical Society, and they tell me that I may be right, but they don't know. They've never thought that this is wrong, so it's about 80% accurate. Other than the cluster of buildings on Capitol Hill, no other public structure in the history of the state to that point had ever cost that much money, and it sits on our campus. By the end of 1900, the college and the city could look back with pride, and also, as they do with the newspaper, a little bit of awe over what they had achieved. The close friendship between Ames and IAC that Beardshear had spoken of in 1891 brought a synergy across the decade that paid dividends for them. Iowa State was no longer a tiny, insignificant agricultural school isolated on the high prairie west of Ames, and the city was no longer little more than a place for John Blair's trains to stop and take on coal and water. Many more improvements came to Ames in the near future. Public library in 1904, fire wagon and horses in 1910, the Mary Lee Medical Center, hospital in 1916. But the achievements of the 1890s put the college and the city community on a path that made construction of these things inevitable. Taken as a whole, these years represent a decade of common purpose, community spirit, and a decade of teaming vitality. Thank you.
If you'll turn the lights up and people who would like to ask questions, I'll bring the microphone around to you so I can see you. Okay, anyone have questions of Doug? Yes.
Oh, please, somebody ask something. Yes, sir.
How was the party for the students? You talked about pretty high discipline, don't do anything out of the ordinary that would cause impact on the university's name. That's changed a lot.
Yeah, well, it has, and this is one of the real problems across the 1880s, mostly because there were so many issues. There's about 330 students in the late 1880s, and it's all very, very close-knit. And everybody knows this. When you get to our point in life, you know people who annoy you, and you know people who don't. And if people who annoy you live next to you and you can't get away from them, you're going to tell them bad things once or twice, in a week or in a year or in a day. And there were a lot of frustrations and a lot of people who didn't get along. And you need to get that space to get away from some people. And Beardshear was extraordinarily good with being able, at 6'3" as a minister, with this hugely deep, wonderful voice that I don't have. He would call you into his office, and all the students that have had that happen to them, when they write their reminiscences, they all agree. When the president looked at you with those dark brown eyes and said, "Your actions were inappropriate, and I expect more than you. I'm very disappointed in you," that was worth 10,000 tirades from the pulpit in chapel, or 1 million cards with the rules printed on them. And he didn't have a lot of behavioral issues. There were some, don't get me wrong, there were some. But when he found them and they were egregious, he just expelled the student. Whereas in our world, we do everything to retain the student, retain the student, retain the student, because it's all about dollars and cents. In his world, where tuition was free, college was very expensive, and it was only open to the very few who could make it in, it was easy to push out the elements that were undesirable. And there were some crazy things that happened. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's you know, in the president's reports, students are expelled for shooting firearms out of open windows. In the 1890s, for shooting out glass panes in the main, you know, things like that. So there was bad behavior, but you know, that was yeah. Go ahead.
What salary was he getting? And I'm assuming he did the chapel service for the students.
Yes, he did. Well, not all the time, but often, yes. What salary?
The salary.
Beardshear salary starts right around $3,500 and goes to about $38,000. He had a house came with it, okay? But a good professor's salary in those years were about $1,200 to $1,800. So, you know, there's more salary compression today, you know, then than there is now. But, you know, he was, you know, pretty well paid. Schaefer over in Iowa City was getting about $5, but at the same time, but Iowa City's a big school. You know, so, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
Did they discover what caused the fire in Old Main? And secondly, how do they finance the construction of Beardshear?
Yeah, okay, there's, where's my thingy here? I didn't do this because I was going to try too many people's patience. This one, the first fire in 1900, there's two fires in the main. One's in December of 1900. The second one that obliterates the structure is in August of 1902. This one is, as far as we can tell, and you know, we can't tell now, obviously, but as people at the time thought, was completely accidental. It appears from the descriptions in the newspapers and in the president's reports that the night watchman, who was in charge of making sure that the fires were banked and that the furnaces were still providing the heat and the water was boiling, etc., etc. All those fires he supposedly checked at midnight before he turned in to go to sleep. And all the fires were banked and there wasn't any hot clinker anywhere. But he was awakened about 3 in the morning by the smell of smoke. So somehow, some kindling in one of the corners of the boiler house caught fire and burned not only the boiler house, but also the north wing of the main, which is, you know, this has been retouched with all the flame coming out the roof, but it's an original photograph. What was left, okay, because you know, the water tower's right there, they got the fire, or water on the fire pretty quickly, and so the whole thing didn't burn. But the second one that burned in 1902, right after Beardshear had died, that destroyed that part of the building, because the trustees did not seem to ever want to show any predilection to tear it down. So, Seaman Knapp, the registrar, the grandson of the fourth president, he always claimed it was some well-meaning student who lit the blaze. Either that or it was him, you know, throwing a match. Because it burns in August, and the institution had changed its academic year from graduating in December, because it always ran from January to December, as an agricultural school, because you had the long break in the middle, so you go back home to work, and you'd come back and, you know, you'd be in school. They changed that to, you know, the current format in 1900, and so that long downtime then is in the summer, you know, in August again, July and August, and it was here when the thing burned when there wasn't anybody in it. So, you know, in December it was packed full, so that wasn't probably arson, but in 1902 it may have been, nobody knows. How was Central Hall funded? This is one of the most, I think, unique and fun stories about the Beardshear presidency, is that throughout the period from 1898 to 1900, 1902, when he dies, he is intent on bringing not only Iowans to his campus, because of course, if I'm the president, everybody comes to my campus, and I show all of you, and I can convince all of you that I need a brand new laboratory building, you're going to go back and call your legislator. So Beardshear's not an idiot. The other thing he did in 1899, 1900, 1901 was he brought the governor, the lieutenant governor, and as many legislators to campus on specific days as possible to show them what he needed and why. And what he initially, his initial predictions for this building were $262,000. It ends up being almost twice that, but his initial predictions were $262,000. So this is a huge amount of money in 1900, and he's trying to get them to do, to build this brand new central building. But the key to it, there's two, obviously the money's one piece, but the other piece, and I think it's so powerful, and it fits Beardshear's model of the university, our college. There's no student room in that building. It's all classrooms, labs, and offices. You don't live there. You have to live off campus, which is what Beardshear wanted. And, as gentlemen over here noted, parties and things that go on in the city, well, not to be crass, but again, if I'm the president and you're a citizen, if they're all in my dormitories, I have to take care of them. If they're all out in your apartment buildings, you get to take care of them. And I can give you all the approbation that I want. Bad student, horrible student, but it's not a problem. Kind of a crass way to look at it, but that's what it is. Yeah.
What ratio of men and women?
Oh, jeez. I have to go back. I know it, but I have to go back and look it up.
From the beginning.
From the beginning?
It was a co-ed institution from the beginning.
From the very beginning. I think there's, I want to say 35 women in the first class of 72, 78. But it's always a good minority. And it is one of the big problems on campus, to be fair. Let me go back to a picture of the name somewhere. Oops, there we go. Until 1895, when they built Market Hall Women's Dormitory, everybody lives in there, or almost everybody lives in there. And the women, the faculty, the first floor are offices and classrooms and labs, and the museum and the library and the chapel. And then the second floor will be the young women, the young ladies' housing, interspersed with some faculty housing. And then the upper floors are the men. And so, we're all, I'm not being indelicate, but we were all young and we all thought a member of the opposite gender was really pretty or really hot, and we wanted to talk to them, and we didn't, if it was 11 o'clock and we wanted to talk to them, we wanted to talk to them. In those days, after 7, unless you were in the literary society rooms that were right in the middle, the central core there, you couldn't talk to girls. And if you did, you'd get written up for it. And you'd end up in the president's office. And you'd say, well, President Chamberlain, all I wanted to do was talk to this great girl. And he'd give you what for. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. They sure did. They sure did. And this is one of the things that, I talked a little bit about this, from the 1880s, that familiarity, because, again, this stuff did happen, where young faculty person, late 20s, pretty young student, 20, 21, it's not like things happen. They do, and it's, it's part and parcel. And we know, I've read the stuff, I've held it in my hand, where Beardshear was having to send several young women and several young men, he had to expel them before, as he put it, repeated inappropriate contact between the sexes. What do you do? This stuff happens. It's a fact of life. And yes, they lived together. Yes, they took care of your children sometimes. When you were in your classroom or you were in your laboratory, they'd take care of them, they'd babysit for you or whatever. But yeah, and you can imagine, and again, I'm not trying to be mean or indelicate, but this is just what happened. Because when you pack everybody in that building and the walls are paper thin, I mean, you know what stuff you say to your spouse when you're mad at them. You also know because you say stuff about, well, what happened at work today, Bob? And then Bob says, oh, that goddamn garbage, blah, 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 blah. Well, this just flows throughout the entire building because they can hear it. And it's a real problem. It's a real problem. Which, one of the things, and then the Beardshear thing of allowing the students to leave on their own and come back on their own honor, that's a huge benefit for him and a huge benefit for the students in the institution. And it changes a lot of the dynamic of what had been before. Yes, sir.
You might address this. I didn't hear. What was the number of men and were there just men, or were there men and women allowed to school?
No, it was co-educational from the very outset.
Right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And what did they have a lot more men than women? Or?
Generally, it was more men than women. Generally, yeah.
And about how many were there men there the first few years?
Oh, usually in a ratio of about 2 to 1.
The number of students.
Oh, what? I think there's 86 or 87 that starts, and then it grows slowly. So that it's in the hundreds for quite a while, and it kind of bumps up to 200 when you get to the 1880s, and 300 in 1890 when it peaks out before you get to Beardshear. But the building was only meant to house 220 people.
And did they go for 4 years then, or 2 years, or?
Well, it depended. I mean, your full degree would be 4 years, but this is not. The bachelor's degree in their time was very different than it is in ours. Okay, now most jobs that your children, you, me, we all applied for, they said bachelor's degree required. In 1890, there was not a single job in New York City that was advertised that asked for a bachelor's degree. You didn't need one. And so a lot of students would come for a quarter or a term, or come for a year, or come for 2 years, and they'd leave. Some of them would, if they were young women, a lot of them would get married. If they were young men, they would go back to the farm, they'd get another job as a clerk or something, or whatever they wanted to do. Some of them would get jobs in the forest service that never graduated. But it was a different world. Whereas in our world, you have to have the degree, in their world, it was a very different thing. Yes, ma'am.
I just didn't want, I thought maybe you might want to do this.
Oh, we may take that.
You can answer more questions.
Okay, so the tape on the bottom is the one we're supposed to Can you read it? Can you read it?
Read it.
Okay. And the winner is Wanda Hall.
Yay.
Right here.
Thank you.
Yay! Congratulations. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
My question is, did family come and visit when you do that?
Well, there was really no place for them to stay. So, we do know, in the 90s, we do know there are a lot of visitors. And on excursion days, and on football days, on sporting event days, yes, family came to visit. But I have not found in the records a lot of discussion about, a lot of, like mom and dad come to visit. You'll get things like, Mary Smith's mom came to visit and they met in Ames. So it'll be, they didn't come out to campus, like we do today, and, wander around, things like that. But like your daughter would take the dinky down to Ames and you'd have lunch or whatever, and then you'd get back on the train and go where the heck you're going to go, or stay for a day or two, or whatever you're going to do at the hotel. It just depended on what the plans were. But, there's that kind of toing and froing, but not a lot of folks coming off and trying to stay on campus because there just wasn't housing for them. But that's the one thing that those early newspapers were really good at, was telling you who was going where with whom. It's a very small town newspaper.